Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar on empowering retail AI, how Microsoft and Splunk are driving digital resilience. We have a special guest today here, Vic, who's going to be introducing himself shortly. I'm Derek Dykens. I'm Splunk's retail and hospitality industry advisor. I've been with Splunk for over 5 years. Before, actually came from Target for a handful of years and was at Cisco for 6 years doing retail as well. So I've spent my career in retail, very passionate about the industry, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today with Vic from Microsoft. Vic, quick introduction.
Thanks for having me on, Derek. So Vic Miles, I am the America's business leader for Microsoft in the retail and consumer goods space. And I lead a team of industry advisors. And we advise our clients in retail and consumer goods on how they can intersect technology and their business goals, right? So we focus almost exclusively on business outcomes. And like yourself, I spent nearly my entire career in retail with a focus on in-store technical strategies. 10 years of that was with Walmart in an engineering leader role. And while I had various roles, I built a specialty for store operational execution. I'm excited to have this conversation today. While I usually focus on pushing the envelope towards the art of the possible, I do believe that resilience must be built in up front. And that's why I think it's important to be here and let folks understand how these technologies can really change the game. And we're not rolling out our father's technology anymore, even my technology anymore. It's gotten much different. So thank you for having me on.
Awesome. Thanks, Vic. I know that both myself and our attendees today are really excited to hear some of your stories and the dialogue around resilience. But before jumping into some of those questions, wanted to first cover who is Splunk and what are we up to. Splunk is a unified security and observability platform. And so we're bringing together data from our retail and hospitality customers in terms of logs, metrics, traces, digital experience monitoring data to understand not only if those experiences and applications are secure, but also to ensure that the applications, the services, and infrastructure are up and running as expected. And so when we look at the strategic alliance that we have with Microsoft, it's really a beautiful thing. The two companies coming together, Microsoft being very data forward, Splunk being a powerful data platform to really drive good outcomes for the retail and hospitality industry. So when we look at the partnership specifically, really being backed by your trusted cloud, Splunk is able to deliver digital resilience in ways that no one else can. And we're really focused on gaining enterprise resilience with data, just like I mentioned, innovating with AI and unlocking Azure value to achieve more with our customers. So now that we've covered the partnership, I wanted to quickly review some of the themes that Vic and I are going to be covering today. The first one is really around modernizing store technologies, as mentioned with digital resilience, and keeping agility in mind. Looking at how retailers are investing in platform strategies to ensure kind of that unified security and observability story across their hybrid IT environments. And then lastly, really touching on cyber threats, the expanding attack surface that we're seeing across these new customer experiences and associate applications that are being deployed in retail. So with that, Vic, I'm going to toss a question over to you. Wanted to get your perspective on how cloud-based store technologies are improving digital resilience, and what are some of the risks that retailers should be aware of?
When I think about digital resilience, us being technologists, we usually think of that about the back office and the systems and whether they're resilient. I also think about it for the retailer's business operations, having that be resilient, whether it is a sale that needs to drop at midnight or something like that, or even the task management resilience around getting carts from the car park and knowing when you need more staff in a certain area, or stocking, high priority stocking tasks. Those are all resiliency type capabilities that a retailer thinks about. And again, you and I think about, are the systems up? Will the services respond? And what's the time? But it's really about how do you get novel technologies and processes on the operations side into the field without taking the full legacy of hardening approaches. Right. So when we think about adding sensors into the retail enterprise, whether those are IoT sensors for cold chain or tracking customers and density and dwell time and that sort of thing, each one of those, while they provide a lot of rich information about how your business is operating, they can increase the attack surface. right? And so, understanding the balance there. And that's why I say getting that novel technology out, how do we do that without, a bunch of firewall rules that become brittle? And if you make any changes on the app side and open up a new, service, that kind of thing, it's just a lot of work. And so that's where I think this partnership really comes together, right? Having an AI based capability that says, I know what the environment looks like. I know what when it's running well, and I can find anomalies before they start to crop up in performance impacts. So that's what I think about in terms of cloud-based store technologies, having those be at the edge where you want some of that just standard resiliency from a network standpoint, some of the data capture capabilities that we're putting out. They don't necessarily need to be online all the time, right? And so we just have to know what are the patterns and practices for delivering that type of tech to the stores.
No, I think that's great. I mean, when you look at predictive analytics with these cloud-based technologies, it's great because ideally anything in the cloud is always on, right? It's centralized, it's easily accessible. And so when you think of these like hyper-distributed stores, thousands of retail locations, tens of thousands of point of sale devices, having those cloud-based technologies that are resilient, that can scale really quickly when the business changes, I think is super important. I would say one of the like kind of small wins, or maybe it's a big win in retail, is just having less dependency on hardware. When you look at, the retail team in the store, they're not IT professionals. And so when something goes wrong, they're typically calling the help desk and saying, gosh, I need to go in the server room. Like, okay, let me troubleshoot all these things. And so the more we can get them out of that kind of support process and on the sales floor, working with the customers, I think is a huge win. Yeah, and then you mentioned a couple of the cybersecurity things that are going on and different vulnerabilities across the store. I think one of the challenges, that I've seen as cloud becomes more prevalent in the retail locations, just the integrations with legacy technology. And so I think there's a more of a pressure now on retailers to modernize the stores, not only by implementing cloud services, but actually looking at their network infrastructure, looking at their data strategy, improving point of sale, modernizing it completely so that they can move more with more agility and do what the business wants to do. So it's definitely a good time for cloud.
Yeah, that balance between adding, new types of capabilities and sometimes hardware, whether they're small sensors or not, without increasing the footprint, right? And again, retailers, we like to sort of hold on to that on-prem environment. It makes us feel like, we can run offline kind of thing. But we've got many clients who are proving that cloud, if done right, will give you as much advance notice, right, around any kind of impacts that you might have. And it is that it's that resiliency that you see, or the impact to your resiliency that you see coming. That's the goal, right? We at Microsoft, we have outages and it happens, right? Things happen. It's about how fast can you recover from those sorts of things. And so it's definitely a balancing act, but that's what keeps it fun.
Yeah, definitely. So on that theme of outages, preventing system failures, I mean, what steps are you seeing some of the small retailers and I guess the larger retailers take as we look at just store operations in general, keeping the store online, keeping those services available? What are some of those steps that they're taking?
Some of the steps that I see start in the planning phases, right? So understanding the environment that you're going to be entering, right? And then some retailers are heavily engineered focused. When you've got that the hybrid or the hyper distributed environment, you can't afford not to be engineering focused, right? You want these capabilities to sort of be always on by the time you deploy to that 1,100 store. And so others are more business driven, right? We need to get this into the market now, almost to the tune of, the technologists among us will understand a shadow IT, right? Where you've actually got a business user making decisions about putting capability into a store. And so backing that up, right? And being open to these capabilities and relying on the cloud, right? So when you have to roll things out physically to the store, that takes there's a long tail of planning that goes there. But when you're just turning on a service in the cloud and you're deploying maybe a single piece of gear that will sort of interface with that, it requires that real-time monitoring be built in. And so there's lots of ways to do it, right? Getting all of those to land, all of those different methods and patterns to land, as you said, in between the new technologies, right, and the legacy technologies. Because I don't see many edge-based capabilities being standalone, right, where they don't need the in-store processor, where they don't need the item catalog that perhaps in the store that has real-time prices or localized prices. And so getting that to a single pane of glass is a real challenge. And that's why I say that if you're going to do that right, you start in the planning phase, right? And you know, I'd be interested, Derek, because I'd like to say I have this figured out, but I'd be interested in how you at Splunk sort of communicate that necessity, right? You could help me. I told you I focus on pushing the envelope and getting as close to value as we can. You know, having the necessity to say, but hold on, there is some diligence we have to do. I'm not in the risk management business, but any sort of pointers there for myself and the audience?
Well, you bring up quite a few great points. I mean, just starting with know the environment that you're going to monitor. So, I mean, typically we'll go in and, you know, I when I'm meeting with a leader over retail technology, my first question is, well, how do you measure store health? Is it based on how many phone calls you're getting this week from the stores? Is it based on some metric that you actually have around service health, whether that's payment, point of sale, an associate application where you're truly measuring uptime? And I think the answer to that is very telling. So if they're doing it based on how many incidents I received, a lot of times they really don't even know how bad their environment could be or how good it could be. So a lot of times if you're waiting for an associate to pick up the phone to tell you something's wrong, hey, my register's slow. You know, we're having issues with our loss prevention application, then you're not really detecting that issue as it's occurring. Your mean time to detection could actually be a bit skewed, right? If you're basing it on the phone call versus when the service actually went down. So I think, yeah, knowing where you're starting is really important, and then understanding where they want to go. So in support of the business, I mean, you mentioned, hey, the business is trying to run, you know, a couple different directions, and IT is gonna, at the end of the day, need to support it, whether it's a new IoT device, a new loss prevention application, right? The business is out there trying to make decisions, and then IT scrambling to how do we secure it? How do we make sure it's resilient? So if the IT organization is trying to get, you know, more proactive, if they're trying to eventually get predictive, or even in some cases automated with the way that they're recovering from these incidents, understanding like where they want to be in the next 6 to 9, 12 months is really helpful as we start to build out a strategy that says, okay, what data sources do we want to look at? How do we look at some really high value use cases around monitoring that are very low effort, very low friction, that just add a lot of value? Some of those, you know, we can build business cases around basically saying, hey, your return on investment is reducing calls from your stores by X% for this specific technology. And that gets a lot of people excited because that's a hard cost, right? And then the business is saying, hey, we're calling IT less. This is great, right? So it's kind of a full circle moment. Yeah, no, and I think you kind of add AI to that, which is really the interesting part as we work through this year. And I mean, yeah, the opportunities are endless. They're fast. It's really exciting to see where it's going.
Yeah, when I think about it, I love that you started with what are the rules that we're going to govern this success by, right? Do you already have them? Whether it is time between transactions, customers per minute, or just any number of heuristics that we can use to train the AI, right? To watch for those anomalies, right? I know when I was at Walmart, I ran the POS development team for about 5 years, and we always had a goal of not having the store call in, right? So when a store called in, you've already lost, right? It takes impact, right? And you start to build empathy for what a store associate what must be going on in their life for them to stop what they're doing on the clock, right? And call. And a lot of times we get a manager, right? Who's paused his or her day to say, I need help, right? And we would obviously stop, you know, when you have that kind of culture, we would stop what we're doing and say, a customer is in crisis. Let's go fix that. But now I think the beauty of AI is being able to identify those anomalies, right? And one of the reasons this is such an important conversation is the machines are, you know, active in the development, right? Whether it's GitHub Copilot, where a lot of the code's being written by a machine, right? The machine can also provide unit tests and understand what's a good look like. And then why couldn't it then also provide a recommendation for remediation of an impact, right? And that feels like it's the future, right? I see registers getting slow when this environment happens. I've deduced from all of the data that I have, I'm putting this on you, Derek. I've deduced from all of the data that I have, and now here's how I would suggest to remedy that solution. Wow, right? That's worth a lot, frankly. You said if I didn't have to call the store, that's meaningful. If I didn't ever have to take any outage, that would be very, very meaningful. So it doesn't hurt to dream.
And what's interesting is that data is there, right? So now that we have this partnership with Microsoft and Splunk, I mean, the data can come in many forms. It can be business data sitting in Azure. It can be log data sitting on a register, metric data, trace data across your infrastructure applications. So being able to now pull that all together and make meaning of it and then spin the AI models, I think is where, things are going to get more and more interesting. So as we look at AI, another question for you, how are retailers integrating those analytics into store technology to create some best practices around security and ideally kind of this operational stability that we've been talking about today?
What we see them doing is looking to business rules and business results, right? So if, again, as I mentioned, if you have a metric around customers per minute, or even, one that I love is response time on credit cards and in any of those, millisecond type lookups, those impacts can they can tell you've got an issue well before you have an issue. And that issue might be a spinning hard drive that's going bad, right? That just causes it to sort of buffer or whatever in the store. It might be network traffic. It could be, some sort of in-store network block. And I've seen it all, right? We once had a store down. You said you wanted a couple of stories. If you don't mind, I'll share one. It had down store is like, I still get chills when I even say the words. Something as silly as every time I print a FedEx return label, I take a return, right? Happens 4 times a week. That printer's plugged into the Ethernet, and it's spitting serial traffic on the Ethernet, and the whole store goes down. You're like, what's going on? And the legacy way of tracking that down was shutting things off, right, one by one, and bringing them back on the hard way, right? You're almost turning lights off in half the store. And so what I see retailers doing now is really putting very tight rules around those metrics that drive their business, right? And they say, when this deviation gets beyond that, we have a problem. Right. And then we celebrate with them, right? You celebrate that, wow, we now are finding problems. Nobody likes to see that your name on a report, your application's name on a report that says you had 52 of these yesterday. But you can go home at night and think about it, right? If you had 52 and there's no outage, if you had 52 phone calls, you're not going home tonight, right? We're going to figure this out before we get it. And so it's about raising the level of expertise, because even our engineers and the folks who do the troubleshooting, I think this is where the value of a resiliency system comes in. And we talk about AI raising the level of expertise for in-store associates, making that 7-month associate the same level of expertise on, speeds and feeds, specs on washing machines and that as the 7-year associate. Now do that, bring that same capability to a technician who's troubleshooting a problem, right? So after about 5 years of this, nothing scares you, right? You've seen all of the symptoms. What if it's your 5th week, right? And you get the call. How does this instrumentation give you a dashboard to look at? So that's what I see them doing, is saying we're no longer going to rely on that 20-year associate to be here around the clock so that this system stays up, right? And there's a lot of legacy. I don't know if you're not a COBOL developer, you've ever tried to troubleshoot a batch job or something. It's not fun, right? And so I see them using AI to really raise the level of expertise of the folks who are engaging and giving them, and this is where Splunk comes in, that dashboard. It says, what does this mean when it's red? Well, let's start there. Right. I've saved you hours. Right. Let's just start with the red dots,
Yeah, and it's great that you bring up the people aspect to it, because a lot of times, we go to talk about AI and it's such a technology-driven discussion, but at the end of the day, culturally, if your people both on the IT side as well as your store associates, right, where you have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, depending on which retailer you are, that are going to be, adapting to this technology, it's super important, right? People have to be bought in on it. The decisions that AI is driving towards have, it has to make sense for the customer, for the associate and their role. And so I think we're going to see quite a shift in what that looks like. I know from a Splunk perspective, when we look at, Splunk AI, we're really focused on taking our Splunk programming language and making that more accessible through natural language so that business users who typically wouldn't be in Splunk can now start to run searches about, their stores and operationally how things are doing, ask questions about supply chain, really any data set that's in Splunk, they'll be able to ask questions of a natural language, which gets you past that, Splunk programming language kind of barrier, and removes the friction to who can use it. So yeah, I think, when I'm looking at some of these ML models, I was kind of laughing when you mentioned, is the hard drive spinning? Just recently was working with a grocer and they're like, hey, we've got all these checkouts and our challenge is, how do we go replace a hard drive on our legacy point of sale systems before it fails mid-transaction? And so quickly just looking at the data and creating a very simple ML model. Now they have predictive analytics on just their hard drive, and that's saving them truck rolls. And if they do a truck roll for a hard drive, they can look across the store and say, what other hard drives should we be fixing while we're there? It saves them.
Yes, look at the report, right?
Yeah. So it sounds so simple. That's why I was laughing to myself, like, wow, this was literally a conversation with a customer just a couple of weeks ago. So
it doesn't all have to be, sexy. You're right. We talk about AI, and I too, really value the human in the loop, right? Because these things happen through people's ingenuity, that sort of thing. And so I'm glad that you're still fighting the good fight out there with the spinning discs and that sort of thing.
Rolling up the sleeves. So I do have a question for you. So recently, I would say over the last year, we've been focused more on like organized retail crime. So focused on basically looking at the behaviors of ORC threat actors. We're looking at things like gift card fraud, return fraud. What's been interesting is that Splunk is in a unique position to bring a lot of this data together in real time, whether it's from the loyalty application or the point of sale logs. And really acting as kind of this fraud engine around, hey, is this behavior an anomaly? Is it something that matches our trend models for organized retail crime? And then actually taking it as far to do like an interrupt on the point of sale if the gift card's been compromised, or if that return is from someone who's been making fraudulent returns, whether you're doing an online return at FedEx or you're doing that in the store at the customer service counter. So it's been interesting to see IT and cybersecurity teams start to build these models versus, traditionally, right, when I was in retail, working for a retailer, like loss prevention sat very far, very, very far away from IT. So fraud and abuse kind of more within the finance world. So are you seeing with your customers, I guess, the two merge where now, because of how big of a problem organized retail crime has become, the business is really leaning on some of the security capabilities to say, hey, you're really good with cyber threats. You understand these models and trends really well across large data sets. Like help us out. I'm definitely seeing that.
I absolutely am seeing that. And one of those just basic sort of things that I think caused that in the industry is how law enforcement looks at organized retail crime, right? And at what level of criminal activity do you need to call it organized, right? And I think what the business has found is, I have to be, they have to get me on multiple fronts to a very high degree for me to call it organized, right? So it just something as simple as jurisdictions. So if you have a county court and a law enforcement organization that works with that court, they will find issues that occur in retail environments in their jurisdiction. If you go across to a different jurisdiction and do the same thing, they're generally not matching those two things, right? They just wouldn't. That's a different case with a different detective and a different judge and all the rest. And so that's where they're coming and saying, hey, there's a lot of data here. When you pull it together, you say, wow, we see this all over the place. What could we do, IT? Right. And so that's the beginning of the conversation is how can you give me visibility across jurisdictions and start to, as you say, build in some remediation at the point of failure. Right. We always want to serve the customer. I don't know a retailer who says, hey, I want to confront a customer in lane. But right. So again, when I was working on POS systems, you could have these little anomalous codes that say, try again, or code H13, which means, yeah, it didn't go through and it's likely not to, right? And then it lets the cashier or that associate in the store handle it with a bit more tact, right? But it also protects your business. And so through that sort of bringing together of data across jurisdictions and looking at these anomalies, we're starting to see retailers understand and then go to, right, with, I don't know if you've been involved in the RELO work that they're doing, the Retail Council. One of the things that they're tackling is organized retail crime, and then going up to the federal government and saying, how would we handle this? Either state or federal, how would we handle this? Where does this case go? It's organized, it's across jurisdictions. And when you have the data, whether it's graphs and charts or just mounds of data, that starts to make a difference. And then I've seen IT be at the table for every one of those conversations. I was surprised by it as well.
Yeah.
Right. So where's the loss prevention person? They said, oh, that's me. Well, where's the IT person? That's me in the same meeting. Right?
Yeah. But I think that sense of collaboration is critical. And so, I mean, I look at organizations like the Retail Hospitality ISAC, where they have the fraud working groups, and it's retailers that would typically be competing, sitting shoulder to shoulder, talking about ORC. Same with RELA, where they want to take what they're learning and share with one another, which I think is great, so that they can take it to federal government and do these things. It's been interesting to see, just the collaboration and the sharing of insights and intel across retailers. It's been great. Shifting gears a bit, so Microsoft, huge in the collaboration space. Wanted to get your take on how digital tools are being leveraged in retail, more around the associate empowerment when you look at these just really, really large workforces out in the field. So what are you seeing from a overall standpoint around productivity, enhancing operations with some of the digital tools?
I think the move to voice, right, is really probably the biggest thing. And so whether it is a wearable headset and you can sort of talk to the AI to understand how to help this customer. And again, raising the level of expertise. Customers don't mind if you have to phone a friend kind of thing, right? They do mind when you turn your back and walk away out of the aisle to go find that friend, right? But if you were able to sort of ask that question and get meaningful data in the context, you might even be able to, not might, but you can mention the customer's name. I'm here with Mrs. Johnson. She bought a refrigerator online 3 days ago. Do you have the order number? Order number is, and you're just reading it out. And now you get all that rich information back, right? It's being delivered today, expected delivery at 2 p.m. That's customer service. Not, I don't know, we don't handle online orders in this store, right? That kind of thing. And I just give you that example. I'm also seeing in terms of serving customers, there's a few retailers, and Target's one of the best in this curbside delivery, right? And having them be able to serve the customer instead of the delivery person, the guy who brings the groceries out to your car, instead of them saying, hey, this is my only task is to bring this out. You say, I want a gallon of milk, right? They're able to use their tablet or their mobile device and say, let me see what our availability is. Can you wait 20 minutes? Boom, I've added it to your order. You complete it on your phone and I'll be right back, right? And now you're in the queue versus, oh no, we can't, you have to start over, right? Go inside the store or something like that. And so really raising the level of service that we can offer to customers. And a lot of retailers will call it surprise and delight, right? You're delighted when you forgot an item, mention it to the delivery person, expecting just for them to console you perhaps. And they say, let me fix that for you. Let me extend the basket size of what you're doing, and then getting that data back. How often does that happen? Right?
Yeah.
Should we build marketing around that service? I would tell you should, right? They should. Those are the kinds of things that I'm seeing is really just looking at friction points in retail and saying, how do we give the associate more information to be able to serve the customer better? And I didn't even mention troubleshooting, right? Where this is not working, why? And it's more than have you tried turning it off and back on, right? It is, I noticed that you keyed your password 3 times, right? We saw that on the logs. I saw a password attempt, right? 3 times. And you could take the brute force, close it down method, or you can route that individual to a helpful AI agent that says, let's get some information from you. Not, please enter your 2-factor code here, right? Like, well, what is that? Where do I get it? Hold on, let me call the manager. And so just working through it like that. It's pretty amazing if you've been in retail, as long as I have, to see where we've come from. The proverbial big cheap tablet, walking around the store making notes on what needs to change. We got a stock here. Let's, before 5 o'clock, let's do this and that. To assigning tasks to a shift. It doesn't feel like a punishment. It feels like, hey, my queue is filling up. My day's going faster, that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, makes sense. I want to go back to a comment you made earlier about just dashboards like single pane of glass. I think now we're seeing a lot more of our retailers bring that data together. So again, looking at actionable insights, not only just having the dashboard and the visualization, but at what point do you want to create an action? And so typically, and this is within the IT organizations, I mean, typically if we're with a CIO or CTO, of course they want to know, hey, my stores are healthy, my supply chain, my warehouse management applications are healthy. But then building on that, once we know just the overall health, to say, well, how is my business performing? Or wait, let's set up some monitoring around my business metrics to be able to know if something might be going wrong in IT that we're not seeing. And so if you're a quick service restaurant and you start to see, your online orders over lunch on a Monday slow down, and they're much lower than normal, that insight to IT, they can actually start to look and say, oh yeah, we're actually seeing some issues with one of our mobile ordering channels, something we didn't have an alert set for. Let's set that and let's get that corrected. So I think detecting those anomalies is great, but more so breaking down these silos of data and being able to bring them together, correlate them, and create new insights that, again, looking back even a few years, weren't possible. Awesome. So Vic, can you share just a real world example of a retailer that you've seen successfully navigate a digital crisis and any lessons that they may have learned? And then after this question, we'll wrap it up.
Okay. And I'll pick one that's not so painful, because some of these digital crises are really something you'd never want to relive. And, it can be triggering even just by mentioning it, who you are kind of thing out there. So one that is, it depends on where the crisis, where it lands, right? Who's being impacted by the crisis? And I'm thinking about a CEO delivering a message to the field, right? An important message. Anytime the CEO is going to stop and take time to do a broadcast, like a live broadcast, right? And we can broadcast the Super Bowl to to 500 million people. But it's sometimes hard to get that video stream out to the edge. And so I can remember a client who, in the middle of their stream, we started to get sort of incidents coming in. I'm not seeing it. It's buffering. What's going on? And if you got 4 people on the call, it's you can deal with that. Pause. Let's see what's happening. When you have 4,000 people listening, and you got a CEO has an expectation that this technology works, right? You need to be able to fix it real time. And so understanding where the issue was, because it's not enough to just slow down traffic, drop people off, please rejoin, but understanding where the issue was in seconds, right? To say, here's the bottleneck. Let's back up one step and let's point our CDN, our content distribution system, right? Let's point that at our geo-redundant, spot, and let's get everybody back online with no change to the feed. You don't have to reconnect. And doing that, you're high-fiving, right? When you do something like that, it's a bit of egg on your face if you're the CIO or even the marketing person who set it up. But then being able to quickly say, I see the issue, let me split the load over here and have it come up And the person delivering the message never knew that there was a 30-second, sort of hiccup for some number of people. And then, using systems like Splunk, you can actually be able to come back. And retailers are very, they say retail is detail. They're very particular about what was the impact to my business, right? And being able to come back and say, I saw exactly 132 people who had their stream impacted based on the telemetry that came back. Being able to say that says, you know your business, right? We can keep using this platform. When it takes you 2 hours and you've got to either redo or put it on demand because people couldn't get it, the credibility from the technologies that we enjoy, right, can really take a hit. And so that's one that was a success story. I got plenty of ones that lasted, many hours and that sort of thing that I don't want to mention.
Yeah, no, very, very good. Yeah, I think mine was more like macro, kind of back to when COVID first started. I was very new to Splunk. I think I was maybe 6 months in. A lot of the plans I had and kind of thoughts around where we would focus shifted really quickly. And so as you recall, a lot of the retailers, the non-essential retailers, I mean, quick service restaurants, they all had to physically close their doors. And that meant that a lot of what would be in-store orders were now all online. And so there were a lot of retailers that took the Band-Aid approach and said, hey, how do we just scale this for the time being? And then there were others that looked at it more long-term and said, hey, how do I use this to my advantage to get more investment across IT, to get things in a much better spot? And so, very quickly, I think a lot of these retailers realized, hey, one, we don't have the visibility we need across this channel that maybe had been 10% of our ordering prior. And then also just seeing the huge increase in cyber threats across those digital attack surfaces. So we were just seeing vulnerabilities, that we had never seen before. People starting to become attackers and threat actors that weren't even in that space, but they just had time at home. So it was a very, very interesting, time for retailers. But those that built, robust, digitally resilient strategies are in a much better spot today. And so I think looking back at that, there were even some retailers that, they weren't doing bookings, they didn't have ships out on the sea, and they were still making big investments with Splunk to improve their, cyber posture or security posture, as well as their digital resilience. So it was a very interesting time. But yeah, I think now, back to your point, if there is a crisis or a setback, like use that to your advantage, use it to innovate. And that can be, a little outage. It can be, a blip in your online ordering, it can be a quick hang up with your supply chain. Look back at it, understand root cause, and use it to your advantage to innovate and do things, much, much differently. So Vic, as we wrap up, any key takeaways or kind of final thoughts?
I think that, you've even had me think a little bit more about this bringing together disparate groups. Right. So we think about data a lot, but as you mentioned, the loss prevention and IT, supply chain and IT, right? Once you stand up an IoT infrastructure, you become part of the business, right? You are physically part of the business. And so that need to integrate the businesses is, I think, where we will go. And, we talk a lot, or at least there's a lot of chatter in the industry about AI sort of consuming a lot of jobs, frankly, right? And so what that does is frees up those individuals to then go join the business and get into, where are we going next? How do we strategize? How do we get the most out of this technology advancement? And so I appreciate you mentioning that. It's a good reminder for all of us.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, for me, it's really invest in the long game, right? Like flex those physical footprints that you have as you look at things like edge compute and bringing those cloud services to your stores. I think the collaboration piece was big, right? Just how you can empower your teams. For me, that's super important. And then invest in your data, right? Listen to your data, put a nice AI wrapper on it and see, what that can do to help you innovate and be more digitally resilient. So appreciate having you here today. I do have a couple slides I just wanted to pull up to kind of recap where we're at with our strategic alliance and partnership with Microsoft. So if you are a Splunk customer today and you're on-prem and you're looking to move to the cloud, a lot of top retailers are running on Microsoft Azure. I'm super bullish and excited about this partnership. There's a lot in it for our joint customers. So seeing Splunk now generally available in Azure is a great thing. Super excited to, work with our partners over there at Microsoft on delivering digital resilience in new ways, innovating with AI. And so if you're a customer or you're not a customer, kind of ending on what you can do today, there's more information about Splunk Cloud and Microsoft Azure at splunk.com/Microsoft. We also have some Azure webinars available around digital resilience that go into more detail around the technology, how the integrations are built, and how the platform is right there within Microsoft Azure. So Vic, it's an absolute pleasure. Yeah, appreciate all of your insights, your experiences, shedding some light on retail and store tech. So appreciate having you here today.
So I look forward to seeing you again in market.
Awesome. Thanks.
Cheers.